Welcome, brave souls, to Sinister Media. You've stumbled into a realm where nightmares come alive and reality bends to the will of darkness. Tonight, we bring you 4 tales of terror that will chill you to your very core. Stories of digital demons, bleeding forests, ancient hungers, and stolen faces. Are you prepared to face your deepest fears? To question the very fabric of reality? Then join us, if you dare, for 4 twisted stories that will terrify you. But be warned. Once you hear these tales, you may never sleep soundly again. Let the nightmares begin.
Mia, Pixel Queen. Chun adjusted her headset and flashed a dazzling smile at the camera. What's up, Pixel people? Ready for another epic stream? The chat exploded with emotes and excitement. At 23, Mia had become one of the most popular streamers on YouTube, known for her quick wit and unparalleled skills in the latest Battle Royale games. Tonight's stream promised to be special. She was unveiling an underground indie horror game that had been generating buzz in niche forums. Alright, let's dive into Whispers in the Dark. Mia's voice brimmed with enthusiasm as she launched the game. The stream counter ticked upward. 50,000 viewers, 100,000, 150,000. The game's opening was atmospheric. An abandoned asylum, flickering lights, and the distant sound of something scratching behind the walls. Mia navigated the decrepit halls, her commentary a mix of nervous laughter and genuine unease. Okay, chat, I'm officially creeped out, she admitted, peering around a corner. If anything jumps out at me, I swear I'll dash. The screen abruptly went black. Mia frowned, tapping at her keyboard. Technical difficulties, folks. Give me a sec dash. A piercing shriek erupted from her speakers, causing Mia to yank off her headphones. When she looked back at her monitor, her blood ran cold. The game was gone. Instead, a grainy video feed showed a dimly lit room. In the center stood a figure in a featureless white mask, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. What the hell? Mia whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to end the stream. Nothing responded. The masked figure raised a gloved hand, revealing a phone. It began to type. Words appeared on Mia's screen, superimposed over the video. Hello, Pixel people. Welcome to the last stream. Mia's eyes darted to her viewer count. 500,000, 750,000. The numbers were skyrocketing. Let's play a game. This isn't funny, Mia said, her voice trembling. Whoever's doing this, stop it now. The figure's shoulders shook in silent laughter. It continued typing. First challenge. Viewers, send me proof of destruction. Break something valuable. You have 60 seconds. Mia watched in horror as her chat filled with images. Shattered mirrors, smashed phones, laptops thrown to the ground. Stop, she pleaded. Don't listen to it. Very good. Now, a gift for our lovely host. The masked figure moved aside, revealing a man bound to a chair. Even through the grainy video, Mia recognized him. Dad, she choked out. Her father's muffled screams tore through her. The masked figure approached him, producing a wickedly sharp knife. Next challenge. Pain. Show me blood. 30 seconds. No, no, no. Mia sobbed, helplessly watching as images flooded the chat. Cuts, burns, horrifying self-inflicted wounds. Excellent. Your devotion is admirable. The knife traced her father's cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. Now, Pixel Queen, your turn to play. Mia's webcam flickered to life without her input. She stared into the lens, tears streaming down her face. Hurt yourself, or Daddy Dearest pays the price. I can't, Mia whispered. The knife pressed deeper into her father's skin. He writhed against his bonds, eyes wild with fear. With shaking hands, Mia reached for a pair of scissors on her desk. She held them up to the camera, then slowly pressed the blade against her forearm. I'm sorry, she whimpered, dragging the metal across her skin. Blood welled up from the cut. Deeper. Choking back sobs, Mia complied. The chat exploded with a mix of horror and sick encouragement. Good girl. Let's raise the stakes. The masked figure moved to a computer setup similar to Mia's. It began typing rapidly. I'm in control now. Your webcams are mine. Your microphones are mine. Mia's screen filled with a grid of viewer webcams. Terrified faces stared back at her. Final round. Someone dies or everyone dies. You're insane. Mia screamed. Let my dad go. The figure wagged its finger, then pointed at the viewer grid. Choose Pixel Queen. One life to save many. You have 60 seconds. Mia's mind raced. This couldn't be real. But as she looked at the faces of her viewers, men, women, even children, she saw genuine fear. Whatever was happening, they believed it. I won't do it, she said defiantly. I won't choose someone to die. The masked figure shrugged, then raised the knife high above her father's chest. Wait, Mia cried out. Her eyes darted frantically over the grid of faces. How could she possibly choose? That's when she saw it. In one of the webcam feeds, a flicker of something unnatural. She squinted, focusing on the image. It was the same room, the same masked figure, but this feed showed it from behind, revealing a bank of computers and video equipment. Mia's eyes widened in realization. It's fake, she breathed. It's all fake. She leaned into her mic, voice strong despite her terror. Listen to me, everyone. It's not real. Look at your webcam feeds. One of them shows the guy behind the scenes. It's an elaborate hoax. The masked figure froze. In the webcam grid, Mia could see confusion rippling through the viewers as they noticed the inconsistency. Suddenly, feeds began cutting out. The viewer count plummeted as people realized the truth and disconnected. The image of Mia's father flickered and vanished. With a distorted screech, the masked figure's video feed cut to black. In its place, a message appeared. Game over. Thanks for playing. Mia's computer abruptly rebooted, returning control to her. She sat in stunned silence for several moments, her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Finally, she took a deep breath and addressed her remaining viewers. I don't know what just happened, but I think we were all part of some sick experiment or prank. She wiped away tears. I'm ending the stream. Please, if anyone actually hurt themselves, get help immediately. I'm so sorry. With trembling fingers, Mia terminated the broadcast. She sat in the darkness of her room, the weight of what had transpired crashing down upon her. Her phone buzzed. A text from her very much alive and unharmed father. Great stream tonight, honey. That horror game looked intense. Mia stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. How much of what she experienced was real? How much was an illusion? She looked at her arm, expecting to see the cut she'd made. The skin was smooth, unblemished. A notification popped up on her computer. A private message from an anonymous account. Thanks for being such a good sport, Pixel Queen. The last stream was a resounding success. See you next time. Smiley face. Mia slammed her laptop shut and backed away from her desk. Her eyes darted to every corner of her room, suddenly feeling exposed. Watched. In that moment, she knew with terrifying certainty. This was only the beginning. The crunch of fallen leaves beneath their boots was the only sound as Liam, Zoe, and Marcus made their way deeper into the Blackwood National Forest. The trio of graduate students had veered off the main trail hours ago, eager to explore the lesser-known areas for their ecology thesis. We should think about heading back soon, Zoe said, checking her watch. It'll be dark in a couple of hours. Marcus shook his head, adjusting his heavy backpack. Just a little further. I want to get samples from that grove we spotted on the satellite images. Liam, walking point, suddenly stopped. Guys, he called out, his voice tight. You need to see this. As Zoe and Marcus caught up, they saw what had given Liam pause. The forest ahead was wrong. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their bark an unnatural shade of deep crimson. The air felt thick, oppressive, carrying a coppery scent that made Zoe's stomach churn. What the hell? Marcus whispered, pulling out his camera. I've never seen anything like this. Liam approached one of the red-barked trees, running his hand along its surface. It was warm to the touch, almost feverish. It's like they're infected or something. Zoe hung back, a sense of unease growing in her chest. Maybe we should report this to the rangers. It could be some kind of disease. As if in response to her words, a low groan emanated from the twisted grove. The three researchers froze, eyes darting around for the source of the sound. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked, his camera forgotten in his hands. Before anyone could respond, a cracking noise split the air. Liam jerked his hand back from the tree he'd been examining. A viscous red liquid began to ooze from where his fingers had been. "Oh God," Zoe breathed, the coppery scent intensifying. "Is that blood?" Liam stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. "It can't be. Trees don't bleed." But as they watched in horror, more of the crimson trees began to seep the dark fluid. It ran in rivulets down their trunks, pooling on the forest floor. Marcus, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear, stepped closer to one of the bleeding trees. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the liquid. "Don't!" Zoe cried, but it was too late. The moment Marcus's fingers made contact with the blood, he let out a strangled gasp. His body went rigid, eyes rolling back in his head. Before Liam or Zoe could react, tendrils of the viscous fluid began to creep up Marcus's arm, enveloping him in a grotesque cocoon. "Run!" Liam shouted, grabbing Zoe's hand and pulling her away from the nightmarish scene. They sprinted through the twisted grove, the sounds of cracking bark and inhuman groans echoing around them. Zoe risked a glance back and immediately wished she hadn't. Where Marcus had stood was now a malformed tree, its trunk bulging obscenely as if digesting a large meal. Liam and Zoe ran until their lungs burned, finally collapsing in a small clearing. The trees here looked normal, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. What just happened?" Zoe panted, tears streaming down her face. Liam shook his head, his eyes wild with fear. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here now." As they caught their breath, a rustling from the underbrush caught their attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, and for a moment, hope surged in Zoe's chest. But as it drew closer, she realized this was no rescue. The thing that approached them had once been human, but now it was a horrific fusion of flesh and flora. Branches protruded from its torso, leaves sprouting from gray, desiccated skin. Its eyes were milky white, unseeing, yet it moved with terrifying purpose. "Oh God," Liam choked out. "It's one of the rangers. I recognize the uniform." The creature tilted its head, a sickening crack emanating from its neck. When it spoke, its voice was a raspy whisper, like whined through dead leaves. "Welcome," it rasped. "The forest has been waiting for you." Liam and Zoe scrambled to their feet, but found their path blocked by more of the grotesque hybrids emerging from the trees. "You cannot leave," the former ranger continued. "The forest needs you. It hungers." With inhuman speed, the creatures lunged forward. Zoe felt cold, wooden fingers wrap around her ankle, and she screamed as she was dragged to the ground. Beside her, Liam fought against the grasping branches that threatened to envelop him. "Zoe!" he yelled, reaching for her outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed for a moment before Liam was pulled away, disappearing into the mass of twisted limbs and leaves. Zoe felt herself being dragged across the forest floor, leaves and twigs scraping against her skin. She clawed desperately at the ground, trying to find purchase, but it was useless. As she was pulled into the grove of bleeding trees, she saw one of the trunks split open like a gaping maw. The last thing Zoe saw before the darkness took her was the tree closing around her, sealing her into a living coffin of bark and blood. Days later, a search and rescue team combed through the Blackwood National Forest, looking for signs of the missing researchers. They found abandoned camping gear and a camera with disturbing, blurry images, but no trace of Liam, Zoe, or Marcus. As the search stretched into its second week, one of the rescue dogs began to act strangely. It led its handler to a secluded grove deep in the forest, where the trees seemed to loom ominously overhead. The handler approached one of the larger trees, running his hand along its unusually warm bark. He squinted, noticing something odd about its surface. There, barely visible beneath a layer of red-tinged bark, was what looked like a human face. Before he could process what he was seeing, a drop of warm liquid fell on his hand. He looked up, seeing a bead of red forming on a gnarled branch above. The dog began to whine, pulling at its leash. But it was too late. The forest had found its next victims. In the days that followed, more search parties entered the woods. None returned. The authorities, unable to explain the disappearances, eventually cordoned off the entire forest, declaring it a restricted area. But the forest continued to grow, its roots spreading unseen beneath the earth. And in the deepest, darkest part of the woods, where the trees bled and the air tasted of copper, new saplings began to sprout. Saplings with all too human eyes. The bleeding forest was always hungry, always growing, and it would not be contained forever. Dr. Elena Reeves pressed her face against the thick glass of the DSV Aquarius, squinting into the perpetual midnight of the Hadal Zone. At nearly 36,000 feet below the surface, the crushing pressure outside their submersible could obliterate them in an instant if the vessel's integrity failed. "Any signs of seismic activity, Dr. Chin?" Elena asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Wei Chun, hunched over an array of monitors, shook his head. "Nothing yet, but the readings from the drone we sent down earlier are odd." Captain Mike Holloway's gruff voice came over the intercom. "Odd how? I don't like odd at these depths." Wei frowned, tapping at his screen. It's as if the seafloor is breathing." Elena turned from the viewport, her brow furrowed. "Breathing? That's impossible." A tremor shook the Aquarius, causing loose equipment to rattle ominously. "What the hell was that?" Mike's voice crackled through the speakers. Before anyone could respond, a low, reverberating sound filled the submersible. It was unlike anything Elena had ever heard. Not quite a roar, not quite a moan, but something ancient and terrifying that made her bones vibrate. "My God," Wei whispered, his face illuminated by the glow of his screens. "Look at this." Elena moved to peer over his shoulder. The seafloor monitoring equipment showed a massive disturbance, as if an entire section of the ocean bottom was rising. "Captain," Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "we need to surface. Now." "No argument here, Doc," Mike replied, initiating ascent proto-dash. His words were cut off as another, more violent tremor rocked the Aquarius. Emergency lights flashed, bathing the interior in a hellish red glow. "We're caught in some kind of current," Mike shouted over the groaning of the submersible's hull. "I can't break free." Elena stumbled to the viewport, gripping the edges to stay upright. What she saw made her blood run cold. The seafloor was moving, undulating like the surface of a troubled sleep. And from the center of the disturbance, something was emerging. Something massive. First came tentacles, if you could call them that. They were more like fleshy mountains, rising from the depths with agonizing slowness. Their surface was a nightmare patchwork of scales, eyes, and gaping maws filled with teeth the size of buildings. "It can't be," Elena breathed, her scientific mind reeling. "It's impossible." As if in response to her denial, a colossal eye opened in the darkness. It was larger than the Aquarius, larger than a blue whale, larger than anything that had a right to exist, and it fixed directly on their tiny vessel. Wei's trembling voice cut through Elena's horrified trance. "The readings, it's not just one entity. The entire seafloor, it's all connected. It's all alive." The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. They weren't witnessing the awakening of a creature. They were witnessing the awakening of a world. An ancient, hungry world that had slumbered beneath the waves for eons. The Aquarius shuddered as one of the titanic tentacles brushed against it. Through the viewport, Elena could see thousands of smaller tendrils extruding from its surface, reaching for them with awful purpose. "Full power to the engines." Mike bellowed, "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. The tendrils enveloped the submersible, and Elena felt a sickening lurch as they were pulled downward. The hull creaked and groaned under the immense pressure. "Hull integrity at 60% and dropping," Wei reported. his voice eerily calm in the face of certain doom. "We have maybe 5 minutes before dash." A sharp crack cut him off as a hairline fracture appeared in the viewport. Water began to seep in, a deadly trickle that would soon become a torrent. Elena closed her eyes, expecting the end. Instead, she felt a strange sensation, as if her very essence was being pulled from her body. She opened her eyes to see Wei and Mike frozen in place, their forms growing translucent. The water rising around her feet didn't feel wet. It felt alive, conscious, and it was absorbing them. As the Aquarius imploded, Elena felt herself disperse into the living ocean. Her consciousness expanded, merging with the vast, alien intelligence that had awakened. In an instant, she understood. It had slept for billions of years, this entity that was not a creature but an entire ecosystem. It had dreamed of the world above, of the life that had flourished in its absence. And now it was hungry. Through her new, impossibly vast awareness, Elena felt the entity begin to move. Titanic limbs that had once been ocean ridges reached upward, towards the sunlit world above. A hunger beyond human comprehension drove it, an insatiable need to devour and incorporate all life into itself. Elena tried to scream, to warn the world above, but she no longer had a voice. She was a part of it now, a mode of consciousness in an ocean of alien hunger. And through her, it learned. It learned of cities teeming with life, of forests and jungles pulsing with energy, of 7 billion souls, each a unique morsel to be savored. As the first tentacles breached the ocean surface, causing tsunamis that devastated coastlines around the world, Elena felt the entity's satisfaction. The hunt had begun. Humanity fought back, of course. Nuclear weapons were launched into the seas, but the explosions only served to feed the ever-growing horror. It absorbed the radiation, incorporating it into its ever-evolving form. From her perspective within the entity, Elena watched helplessly as continents were engulfed. Billions of lives were extinguished, their essence absorbed into the collective consciousness of the ancient hunger. As the last vestiges of human civilization crumbled, Elena felt a spark of something within the entity. A flicker of the billions of absorbed consciousnesses, somehow maintaining a shred of their individuality. And in that spark, she found hope. With monumental effort, Elena focused her will. She reached out to the other absorbed souls, calling them to action. If they couldn't stop the entity, perhaps they could change it from within. The war for Earth's future raged on two fronts. In the physical world where the last pockets of humanity fought a hopeless battle, and within the eldritch consciousness of the entity, where absorbed souls struggled to exert influence over its insatiable hunger. In the end, it came down to a simple truth. The entity had been alone for eons. The voices within it, though born of consumption, offered something new. Companionship, diversity, a richness of experience it had never known. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. The entity's hunger, while not extinguished, was tempered. It began to create rather than simply consume, melding the absorbed biomass into new, impossible forms of life. Earth would never be the same. The world that emerged from the ocean was an alien landscape, a hybrid of the entity's ancient essence and the countless lives it had absorbed. And at its core, guiding its growth, were the souls of those who had fought to save what they could of humanity. Elena, her consciousness spread through this new living world, felt a bitter triumph. They had lost everything, but in doing so, they had birthed something entirely new. A world where the line between life and planet had been erased. As the transformed Earth hung in space, a swirling mass of tentacles and alien vegetation, the hunger turned its gaze to the stars. There were other worlds out there, other sources of nourishment, and it would have them all. The hunger below had awoken, and the universe would never be the same. Sheriff Abigail Redmond's boots crunched on the frost-covered grass as she approached the body. Dawn was just breaking over the small town of Whispering Pines, casting long shadows across the abandoned Miller farm. "What be ye we got, deputy?" she asked, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. Deputy Tom Hartley stood up from his crouched position beside the corpse, his face pale. It's Sarah Collins, Sheriff." or what's left of her. Abigail's stomach churned as she took in the grisly scene. The body was intact, save for one horrifying detail. The face was gone, removed with surgical precision. "Jesus," Abigail muttered, running a hand through her graying hair. "That makes 3 this month." Tom nodded grimly. "And always the same. No signs of struggle, no other wounds. Just the face," Abigail finished. She'd seen it twice before. First Old Man Jenkins, then teenage Lily Prescott. Now Sarah Collins, the kindergarten teacher. A rustling in the nearby cornfield made them both spin around, hands on their holsters. A figure emerged from the dry stalks. Frank Collins, Sarah's husband. "Frank?" Abigail called out, confused. "How did you know to come here?" Frank's face was blank, his movements oddly stiff. I was looking for Sarah. She didn't come home last night." As he drew closer, Abigail felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. Something was off about Frank. His eyes seemed empty. "Frank, I'm so sorry," Tom began. "But we found Dash." In a motion too fast to follow, Frank lunged at Tom. There was a sickening tearing sound, and Tom fell backward, blood spurting from his throat. Abigail drew her gun, but Frank was already on her. As they grappled, she saw his face shift. The skin rippled like water, and for a moment, she was looking into Sarah's eyes, wide with terror. With a surge of adrenaline, Abigail pushed the thing wearing Frank's face away and fired 2 shots into its chest. It stumbled back, hissing, an inhuman sound that made her hair stand on end. Before she could fire again, it turned and sprinted into the cornfield with impossible speed. Abigail gave chase, but as soon as she entered the field, she knew it was hopeless. The creature had vanished. Panting, she returned to check on Tom. He was alive, barely, the wound in his neck bubbling with each labored breath. As she called for an ambulance, Abigail realized with growing horror that the body of Sarah Collins had disappeared. In the days that followed, panic gripped Whispering Pines. Abigail imposed a curfew and called for backup from the state police, but it did little to calm the town's fears. People eyed their neighbors with suspicion, wondering if the face they saw was real or a mask worn by the monster. Abigail spent sleepless nights poring over old legends and folklore, searching for anything that matched what she'd seen. The locals whispered about skinwalkers, shape-shifting witches from Native American lore. But this felt different, older, more primal. A week after the incident at the Miller farm, Abigail sat in her office, staring at the evidence board. Photos of the victims, or rather, their faceless bodies, stared back at her. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her hand instinctively moving to her gun. The door opened to reveal Tom, his neck still bandaged but looking much better. "Sheriff, I think I found something." Abigail relaxed slightly but remained on guard. "What is it, Tom?" He laid a map on her desk, pointing to a spot deep in the forest outside of town. "There's an old cave system out there. The locals call it Whisperer's Grotto. I've been asking around, and apparently, there have been stories about it for generations. People going missing, strange noises in the night." Abigail studied the map, a sense of dread building in her gut. Why hasn't anyone investigated before? Tom shrugged. "Folks around here are superstitious. They avoid the place. But given what's happening," Abigail nodded, her jaw set. "Gear up. We're heading out there now." The forest was unnaturally quiet as Abigail and Tom approached the entrance to Whisperer's Grotto. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow their footsteps. The cave mouth gaped before them, a wound in the earth that exhaled a fetid odor. Abigail flicked on her flashlight, its beam swallowed by the darkness ahead. "Stay close," she murmured to Tom. "And for God's sake, be quiet." They ventured into the cave, the beam of their flashlights revealing twisted rock formations that seemed to writhe in the shifting light. As they went deeper, Abigail began to hear something, a soft, melodic humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Tom. But when she turned to look at him, Tom was gone. In his place stood herself, Another Abigail, identical down to the last detail, save for the eyes. Those eyes held an ancient, hungry intelligence. Before she could react, the other Abigail's face split open like a blooming flower, revealing a mass of writhing tendrils. They lashed out, wrapping around Abigail's arms and legs, pulling her closer. Abigail screamed, the sound echoing through the cavern. She fired her gun wildly, the muzzle flashes illuminating a nightmarish scene. The walls of the cave were lined with faces, hundreds of them, stretched and distorted, their eyes moving and mouths working silently. As the tendrils tightened around her, Abigail heard the humming grow louder. It was coming from the faces, she realized. A lullaby sung by stolen voices, soothing the monster as it fed. With the last of her strength, Abigail reached for the flashbang grenade on her belt. As the tendrils began to tear at her face, she pulled the pin. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. The creature shrieked, its grip loosening just enough for Abigail to break free. She ran, stumbling through the darkness, the wails of the monster echoing behind her. Abigail burst out of the cave into the fading daylight, gasping for air. She didn't stop running until she reached her cruiser, her hands shaking so badly she could barely start the engine. As she sped back to town, Abigail glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw something shift beneath her skin, a ripple across her cheek. But then it was gone, and she convinced herself it was a trick of the light. The official report stated that a gas leak in Whisperer's Grotto had caused mass hallucinations in Whispering Pines. The cave was sealed off, and eventually, the town returned to a semblance of normalcy. But sometimes, in the dead of night, residents would wake to the sound of soft humming drifting on the wind. And in the morning, they would eye their neighbors carefully, searching for any sign that the face they wore wasn't their own. Sheriff Abigail Redmond remained at her post, watching over the town with vigilance. And if sometimes her deputies noticed her studying her reflection with an unsettling intensity, or heard her humming an unfamiliar lullaby under her breath, well, that was just the stress of the job, wasn't it? In Whispering Pines, the Skinwalker's lullaby played on, a quiet melody underscoring the rhythms of small-town life. The creature slumbered, but it would wake again. It always did. And when it woke, it would be hungry for new faces, new lives to wear. After all, in a world of masks, who could say which faces were real and which were stolen? In Whispering Pines, every smile held a secret, and every lullaby carried the promise of teeth in the dark.
You've survived our quartet of terror, but the question remains. At what cost? The last stream may have ended, but can you trust your scream? The forest may be far away, but do you hear the trees whispering? The ocean seems calm, but what hungers in its depths? And that face in the mirror, is it truly yours? If these tales have left you hungry for more frights, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Sinister Media. Ring that bell to ensure you never miss a nightmare. Share your thoughts in the comments below, if you can still type with trembling hands. And remember, in the world of Sinister Media, the line between fiction and reality is thinner than you think. Sweet dreams. If you can still sleep.